Burning Point.
Our guest speaker, Giulietta Chiesa, former member of the European Parliament and Italian journalist covering international relations. First of all, thank you very much for joining us. So, the subject of today's program would be the legitimacy of decisions of international organizations and their role in today's political environment, so to say. The whole picture does seem a little bit sinister to me, but perhaps I'm wrong. So how do you see that? How legitimate have been the recent decisions of the United Nations and international organizations in general?
Well, in this case, I believe that you are right when you believe that it is a little bit sinister, this kind of declaration, because it demonstrates that in this moment there is no legitimacy at all from the international community about the acts and decisions they take. This is clearly illegal because Mr. Ban Ki-moon has no any possibility, juridical possibility to ask straight personally to a chief of state of government to intervene in another country. He has no legitimacy, and if it is true, it is a completely illegal act. But I would like to remember you that some weeks ago we assisted to another very, very serious and much more important violation of all the rules of international law when the Security Council of the United Nations approved with a large majority and with the extension of China, Germany and Russia, a resolution giving the right to intervene militarily on a territory of a sovereign state like Libya. This was a clear, evident violation of the same chart of the United Nations, while in the third paragraph of this chart it is written clearly that such a military intervention would be acceptable, would be legal, only if this state will violate peace and international security, which never happened because Libya did not menace any international security and certainly not the international peace. That means the Security Council voted a resolution cancelling completely the fundamentals of the Chart of the United Nations. That means you are fully right when you say that it is a worrying situation when all the rules of international law are violated by the international community.
Mr. Chiesa, but is there any clause in any international law which envisages the intervention to protect the civil population, like, well, a pretext that was used in the case of Libya?
Well, it was a pretext. Now we know that it was a pretext because many documents are appearing now in the last days that shows that there was no mass killing in Libya. And the first information which has been given by Al Jazeera, for instance, speaking of 10,000 dead was absolutely false, and so on. And the mass graves in Libya never have been shown, and many other things we know now. And I would like to add that now we know that France and Great Britain signed a pact in November 2010, that means many months before the beginning of this war, signed a pact to defend themselves. This is more or less the official formulation, which has been published on internet, and it is possible to see on internet, calling for such a kind of military exercise named Southern Mistral 2011. And in this document it is written that the military action from the part of France and Great Britain should be engaged between March 21st, 25. That means we have in this military exercise the full description with 4 months in advance of the aggression against Libya. That means all the argumentation according to which the intervention has been done for humanitarian reason is completely false, and it was a pretext. But I would like to add that there is no one rule in the international law giving authorization to intervene militarily against a state for humanitarian reasons. Probably somebody would like to have this rule, but till now this rule does not exist, and probably it would be very good, very interesting if the General Assembly of the United Nations will discuss the introduction of this rule, but this rule has to be very attentively, very seriously examined and approved, and we have not any approval of this kind.
Just to remind listeners, this is Giulietto Chiesa, former member of the European Parliament and Italian journalist covering international relations.
You're tuned to the Voice of Russia.
And Mr. Chiesa, now you have just mentioned the United Nations, but if we remember the role of the United Nations in the war against Iraq, if we remember what we have just seen now in the case of Libya, doesn't it seem to you that the role of international legislation and the respect for the decisions of international bodies, as well as their own stance, are in a crisis, so to say?
Well, it was evident at that time, but in the case of the intervention in Iraq, you know that it was illegitimate intervention, one-side intervention decided by the United States. It was clear at that moment, and many in Europe and all over the world understood that it was a violation of the law. That means we are in front now, it is clear, but nobody wants to speak clearly about that and publicly. We are in front of a clear violation of the bona fide of the Security Council. That means all what happened in the last 10 years, including the so-called war, international war against terrorism, has been based on a falsification, on a violation of rules, and so on. We have lived the last 10 years in a full, complete international illegality.